Miami Hurricanes have a big series coming up. Javi, we're going to get into this with Miami, Florida. It's always a big time of year. The Hurricanes just kind of setting the stage here, 22 nationally, 7-2 record. They lose the game to FAU. Then Florida, sixth in the country, 8-1. They won their last four. Javi, let's start right with the starting pitching. To me, that's what jumps off at this. Pitching in general is going to be big. Florida is coming in with some high marks in the country, over 12 runs a game so far. The hits are up there. Slugging percent leads the country. They've got some individuals doing well. Just your impressions of Miami's starting pitching. Gino DeMari's already said they're going to keep it the same rotation with Gage Zeal, Carson Ligon and Alejandro Rosario, the top three guys. Just your thoughts on that coming into this series here.
Yeah, I think, if you look at it from a two-series perspective, right, all eyes are sort of on Gage Zeal. He certainly had his struggles opening weekend. And in the first, the first time through the lineup last Friday night, gave him some trouble, certainly. But I think for me, the growth aspect that I saw was he bared down and finished the outing on a strong note, ended up with a career-high 9 strikeouts, which I think is huge, right? Because, especially him as all the success he had last year as a reliever. He's got a new role. He's pitching on Friday nights, presumably against the other team's best guy, looked at and viewed as the ace of the team. I think that was a huge stepping stone. So I'm excited to see what he comes out with on Friday night. Obviously, Carson Ligon has been the best guy to me. He's really mature, really polished, has a really good feel for the strike zone. And I think when you watch him pitch, he just kind of has a good idea of what he wants to do. He looks like he's always in command of the situation. And I've been really pleasantly surprised with Rosario. I think, he certainly has had his share of struggles. And obviously, when you look at it from a stuff perspective, he certainly has the best stuff on the Hurricane staff. He lights up the radar gun of, velocity in the upper 90s at times, a really good breaking ball. I just think consistency has been his biggest issue. And through the first 2 weeks, I think he's had some quality starts. He worked out of some big jams on Sunday against Dartmouth. So I'm excited. I mean, look, you mentioned it. You talked about that Gator lineup. It's intimidating. They're going to be on the road, but I think we're going to see what this starting staff is made of this weekend.
Yeah, and I think just with Carson and Alejandro, people should be pleasantly impressed with what they've done so far. Again, the opponents, Penn State, and as you mentioned with Dartmouth, but both of those guys, the way last year went for them, Carson that second half, really faltered there as a freshman. And then Alejandro had his ups and downs, finished strong with a good outing there in the regional. But both of those guys, so far, so good. With Gage in particular, as you mentioned, he did have these innings where, he got those big innings behind him in both starts and kind of, finished strong. And as you mentioned with the strikeouts, essentially what's working when things are going well for Gage, what's he doing well? What has he done well? And then, conversely, when it's not going well, what is he doing? I know Gino has kind of hinted at maybe getting balls up a little bit. Just what have you noticed, or what's the differences with Gage?
Yeah, I think when Gage and certainly with any pitcher, you get in trouble is usually your fastball command, right? I think what we saw week 1 against Penn State was a lot of elevated fastballs. He was pitching behind in the count a lot, and I think too, what we saw from an offensive perspective was they're really aggressive. I think Gage's bread and butter is that breaking ball. And when he gets ahead in the count, the ability to use that breaking ball out of the zone and get some swing and miss is his go-to. So I think we saw 2 lineups that were really, really aggressive. I would expect the Florida Gators to, use a similar approach, a similar game plan against him. They're going to want to see fastballs early in the count and swing accordingly. But I think for his success, this weekend and in the future, it's got to be commanding that fastball in the zone. I think the stuff is there. We know he has the ability to strike people out, evidence last weekend, but you got to get ahead. You got to get guys, out in front, get ahead in the count, and have the ability to use that breaking ball to your advantage. So I would think it's a 2-pronged approach, getting ahead. And then once he gets ahead, using that breaking ball to his advantage.
Thoughts on the bullpen so far? With Ronaldo, he had that tough outing there against FAU, so he'll be looking to bounce back. But maybe kind of how it's shaping up these first 9 games so far. Andrew, they thought about using him as a starter. Now that he's going back to being a closer. There's some new names that'll be in this series for the first time. I'm curious to see how these guys do. But just overall impressions, they did lose some arms to injuries so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to get a big sample size this early in the year. I've certainly been impressed with the left-hander freshman Chris Cinta. He pitched really well last night. He's been put in some really tough situations and pitched his way out of them. I would expect his role to continue to expand as the season progresses. We saw Torres come in and start a week and a half ago, and he did really well. So I would expect him to get, some looks this weekend. And I think from the perspective of the Hurricanes, you have, a really solid All-American closer in the back end. So you got to work forward, right? You have to figure out how to get the outs before him, figure out how to bridge that gap. And I think it's going to be a committee. I know I mentioned Chris Sinta, but I've really been impressed with his stuff. He's looked really good. And we're going to have to rely on some guys that we probably haven't seen a whole lot of to step up and pitch in some big situations. I think when you go into these weekends against, Florida, you have to expect the unexpected, and it's going to be all hands on deck. We have 2-day games, a Saturday afternoon game and a Sunday afternoon game. It's going to be hot, I presume. So, you got to rely on the entirety of that bullpen staff.
Yeah, the schedule is interesting. So it's going to kick off Friday night, 6:30 on SEC Network Plus, and then they're going to go 2:00 on Saturday, same network, and then 12:00 on Sunday on the SEC Network for people maybe a better chance to see the team, see the game. Javi, what Florida's been really good. It's not gone well for Miami over the years, kind of since that 2009 Super Regional there. But, Miami last trip to Gainesville, they did take 2 of 30 in 2021. They dropped the series last year, but just maybe some keys. And when you're facing an opponent like this that is good and you're on the road in the rivalry, and like I said, as things have not gone well at times over the years.
Yeah, I think it's it's one of those weekends that both sides have scheduled early on. I think you want to get through the first 2 weekends of the season, and you don't want to, necessarily look ahead. And I think both clubs did a good job of that. But you end up knowing the majority of the roster on either side. You play with them in summer ball and growing up. There's some South Florida names on the Gator roster, and likewise some Central Florida names on the Miami roster. So I'm sure there's a lot of familiarity between the two clubs. Obviously, the two skippers know each other well from competing against each other. So I think the most important thing is trying to take it one game at a time. Obviously, depending on the publication, Florida's a top 10 team anywhere you look. The lineup is really good. The arms they're going to throw at you Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are all really, really good, really talented. We're going to see some premium MLB velocity from those guys. So, I mean, you really have to, if you're Coach Tamari and Coach Artiaga, Coach Lopez, make sure that some of the younger guys understand that, it's going to be a big environment, probably the biggest crowd they've played in front of this year for sure. And that ultimately you're there to win ball games. You want to try and win the series. And if there's an opportunity to sweep, you got to take care of that. But first things first is that Friday night game. I'm assuming it'll be a sellout crowd. Florida's got new ballpark. I'm sure there's a lot of buzz in the air. It'll be a ranked matchup. So this is what you come to University of Miami for. This is the kind of matchup you, as a kid, you look forward to. And I'm sure that clubhouse is buzzing thinking about it.
Let's talk about the lineup a little bit. Last year's series and that Friday night game. Yo-Yo Morales had a big performance, led him to a win, had a double, a couple hits, a home run, 3 RBIs in that one. So that was definitely what they need from him. I think that's what they need again this weekend. I know it's tough in baseball to put a lot on one guy in the lineup, but I think Morales is definitely has the potential. We wouldn't speak so highly about him if he didn't have the potential to do so. But I think he's got to have one of these big time performances to really lift the team, and I think the guys will rally behind him. They talk so much about his leadership, and we're seeing Morales is coming around. I know a little bit of a slow start if we're talking a little bit on a couple games. But 9 games in, the numbers are impressive. 424 batting average, 4 home runs, which leads the team, the 12 RBIs. So his OPS over 1,300. So the numbers are all there now. And I think, what you're hoping to see is one of these big weekends from him.
Yeah. And what's so impressive about Yo-Yo is every single scouting report, game plan will have his name circled. And every team knows you can't let that guy beat you. And he still is able to put up the numbers that he does, which is just a testament to the caliber of player that he is, the talent that he possesses, and ultimately the type of competitor he is. I think when you watch a Yo-Yo Morales, he's one of those bigger than life players for the University of Miami, and they always seem to have one every cycle, and a guy that you can count on and rely on. And ultimately it comes down to who can protect him in that lineup. I think the first couple of weeks of the season, we've seen Zach Levinson really step up, a name like Blake Sear also stepping up and had a really huge production as a freshman. So you have to rely on those guys too. If you really want Yo-Yo to have the kind of weekend that you expect him to, you need some of those guys behind him to pick up some of the slack and to allow Yo-Yo to see more fastballs as the weekend progresses. Ultimately, the hardest position to be is as this, the singular name and the one that everyone circles is you don't see a lot of fastballs. And I think, early on in the year, we've seen the bottom half of that lineup do his fair share to make sure that Yo-Yo gets some pitches to hit. And when he does damage.
Another guy, CJ Kafis,
Yeah.
the batting average at 235, not with what you want to see. And Coach Damari talked about, it feels like CJ may be pressing a little bit, and it's easy to do so. Maybe he's still adjusting to being in that 3 or 4, that depending on lefty righty matchups. But Kafis, what a number that kind of impresses me so far, the 6 walks to 3 strikeouts. If you're looking at some small stuff, that's impressive. So he's getting on base. We'll see if he can kind of have some big hits and kind of add to his RBI total. He did have a walk-off homer already this year, so that was great to see from him. Another guy, Ian Farrow, the 5-for-5 performance against FAU. Talk about Levinson and Sear. Farrow, maybe he'll be ready, and I know they want to get Dario Gomez going as well at the top of the order there. It's a big series. I know he was excited for this opportunity to be at Miami, so this is that series, to hopefully that he'll be able to hit well. Maybe some lineup things to watch for. Really, it's the only thing that to pay attention to really is that second base with that Blake Sear, batting so well, and coach has talked about it. It can't really take him out of the lineup. Dorian Gonzalez Jr., kind of a late inning defensive replacement, a left-handed bat if they need to go righty-lefty. But other than that, it's kind of these are their guys that they're rolling with, and that's what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think too, Gino's got a good, an enviable problem, right? You have so many names that you're trying to fit into a 9-person lineup card, right? And at this point of the season, you got to ride the hot hand, and I think Blake Sear has proven just that. I think there's been opportunities that he was given, and he's sort of run with it. And Dorian Gonzalez has also played pretty well. Last with Dartmouth, he comes in on Sunday, hits a home run, and I think he hit one on Saturday too. So it just goes to show that it's a really deep lineup. I think from 1 to 9, it's very difficult for a pitcher to navigate. You have a guy like Dario Gomez that hit over 300 last year, was all conference at Nevada, and he hasn't gotten going yet. So that's kind of scary if you're really thinking about it. You have guys like Farrow, Gomez, and Kafis, who are all extremely capable hitters who haven't really hit their stride yet. So lineup wise, it's difficult to pitch to. You have that big elephant in the room with Yo-Yo Morales right in the middle of there. So finding where to navigate outs is something that's tough. And myself as a pitcher, I went to the game last Saturday against Dartmouth. Miami won. I think it was 6-0, but I was looking at that lineup thinking to myself, where would I get the outs, to get momentum and get rolling? And it's tough. That lineup is really tough. They have, like I mentioned, just a lot of guys who haven't really gotten the ball rolling yet. And it's scary to think that, they've hit so well already, and there's several guys that haven't really hit their stride.
And with that, 24 home runs. We're talking about Florida bringing the power. They had 23 home runs on the season. Like I said, top 5 in a number of categories, but Miami actually has one more homer than them, 3rd in the country with 24. That's 10 different guys with a home run already last year. It's an impressive number. I know the opponents that they faced, but from a team that was middle of the pack in the conference last year in home runs, it's good to see that they got multiple guys, and they've kind of counted on this. Farrow with his big numbers at Florida Gulf Coast, he's hitting some home runs. I know Coach Damari has really liked Levinson's possibility with homers, and he's delivering so far early on, and Carlos Perez is getting that opportunity up and down the lineup. Guys have a few home runs already, so that's good to see. Javi, I'm going to let you get going. Any other thing to maybe pay attention to with this series that kind of maybe something you'll be paying attention to is maybe either key for Miami or maybe just something within this game that we either haven't addressed or maybe you want to address a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think, we've obviously talked about the offenses for both clubs. And I think a lot of times in these series, it'll come down to situational hitting, a lot more small ball and manufacturing runs. I think when the pitching gets tight and it gets rolling, there's momentum on both sides pitching wise. There's not a lot of opportunity to hit the long ball. Obviously, both teams have benefited from the long ball this early part of the season, but these rivalry games, usually it's one play, it's a bunt, it's, an error. It's making sure that you play clean baseball, moving runners over, and ultimately timely hitting. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to a well-played series. I think as a fan now, it's awesome to sit back and watch these games. Obviously, it's going to be a packed house in Gainesville. Wish I could be there and catch the games, but I'm certainly looking forward to watching, great rivalry weekend.
Yeah, we touched on Miami's rotation. I assume Florida's going to go with the same couple that they've had the first couple weekends with Sproat Waldrop, couple of righties, and Caglianone's a very impressive guy, fun to watch in terms of what he does pitching, and leads the nation in home runs with 7. Wyatt Langford had a huge year last year with 26 homers. So Miami will look to keep him under control, keep the Florida offense down. And like you said, situational hitting certainly will need to be better than they were last time out against FAU. Javi, I'll let you get going. This is fun. Looking forward to seeing how this series goes.
Thanks, Chris. Always a pleasure catching up with you, man.